Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honour this evening or afternoon to introduce Geoffrey Hill. My name is Andrew McNeely and I'm the literature editor at Oxford University Press, publisher very recently of this magnificent volume, the collected critical writings of Geoffrey Hill, a work of major importance in the history of letters in our lifetimes and beyond. I welcome you all on behalf of my colleagues, particularly Dr. Chris Fletcher, Keeper of Western Manuscripts at the Bodleian Library, our hosts to whom we owe this movingly appropriate accommodation, Convocation House, the very room where Charles I held his parliament in the earlier phases of the English Civil War, and where later Oliver Cromwell also presided. The poems we are to hear read include work by John Milton, as well as poems by Geoffrey Hill that reflect his profound interest in the 17th century and in the writings of Milton, some copies of whose works were burned just outside the front door here during the Restoration. This, as you know, is Milton's quatercentennial year. He will be 400 on the 9th of December, a matter currently celebrated elsewhere in the library in the exhibition Citizen Milton, devised by Dr. Sharon Achenstein of this university. Geoffrey Hill's collected critical writings make only passing reference to Milton on a handful of occasions. On their evidence, you might not guess at the weight of Milton's word in Geoffrey Hill's thought. Weight of the word, weight of the world is. But his poetry has long carried a Miltonic burden also being song. From the early lyric, I had hoped when violence was ceased, right down to his latest collection from Penguin, A Treatise of Civil Power, and before it, the major long poem, Scenes from Comus. As to Geoffrey Hill's A Treatise of Civil Power, the title, you'll remember, from a pamphlet by Milton on religious liberty, there is a history to that collection in which both the Bodleian Library and I have an interest to declare, and it is an interest that stands behind this occasion. In my spare time, I run a small press known as Clutag Press. 3 years ago, we published our first poetry pamphlet, more a booklet. It was by Geoffrey Hill and entitled A Treatise of Civil Power, a kind of version of the later Penguin collection. This was an extraordinary event for so obscure and small an imprint. Recently, the Bodleian Library acquired the Clutag archive and is purchasing it by instalment. Researchers writing on Geoffrey Hill are already using it. There is a display here today from the archive tracing a treatise's evolution towards publication, and we hope you will pause to enjoy it after the reading and before you go on to the Citizen Milton exhibition. I first heard Geoffrey Hill read more than 40 years ago. He was giving a course of lectures on poetry from Yeats to Ted Hughes and Tom Gunn over a number of weeks. So I saw and heard him once a week through that time. He was the first poet I'd ever set eyes on, and the first I'd ever heard read in person, and how he read. I knew then at once, with the certainty and wisdom of youth, that I had encountered the real thing. I observed him with passionate interest, but I was too shy to dream of speaking to him. Now, all these years on, some 11 major poetry collections later, not to speak of the prose, I am not just proud, I am frankly amazed and most grateful to the Bodleian and to Geoffrey to find myself here, as was inconceivable so long ago when I was 19, to introduce to you one of England's great poets of all time, Geoffrey Hill, who will now read to us. But just before he begins, please make him feel the warmth of your welcome.
I will begin with A poem of praise to Milton on Paradise Lost. When I beheld the poet blind yet bold, in slender book his vast design unfold, Messiah crowned, God's reconciled decree, rebelling angels, the forbidden tree, heaven, hell, earth, chaos, all. The argument held me a while, misdoubting his intent, that he would ruin, for I saw him strong, the sacred truths to fable and old song. So Samson grasped the temple's posts in spite, the world o'erwhelming, to revenge his sight. Yet as I read, soon growing less severe, I liked his project, the success did fear. Through that wide field, how he his way should find, or which lame faith leads understanding blind, lest he perplexed the things he would explain, and what was easy he should render vain. Or if a work so infinite he spanned, jealous I was that some less skilful hand, such as disquiet always what is well, and by ill imitating would excel, might hence presume the whole creation's day to change in scenes and show it in a play. Pardon me, mighty poet, nor despise my causeless, yet not impious surmise. But I am now convinced, and none will dare within thy labours to pretend a share. Thou hast not missed one thought that could be fit, and all that was improper dost omit. So that no room is here for writers left but to detect their ignorance or theft. That majesty, which through thy work doth reign, draws the devout, deterring the profane, and things divine thou treat'st of in such state as them preserves, and thee inviolate. At once delight and horror unasseise, thou sing'st with so much gravity and ease, and above human flight dost soar aloft, with plume so strong, so equal, and so soft. The bird named from that paradise you sing, so never flags, but always keeps on wing. Where couldst thou words of such a compass find? Whence furnish such a vast expense of mind? Just heaven thee, like Tiresias, to requite, rewards with prophecy thy loss of sight. Well mightst thou scorn thy readers to allure with tinkling rhyme of thy own sense secure, while the town bays writes all the while and spells, and like a pack-horse tires without his bells. Their fancies like our bushy points appear. The poets tag them, we for fashion wear. I too, transported by the mode, offend, and while I meant to praise thee, must commend. thy verse created like thy theme sublime, in number, weight, and measure, needs not rhyme. The commendatory verse is signed simply A.M., which many scholars have attributed to Andrew Marvell. I checked this in a dictionary of Milton usage, which immediately distressed me. It says it's unfortunately not one of Marvell's best poems, but is of historical importance as the earliest versified criticism in English, allusive in all likelihood both to Milton's Samson and Dryden's State of Innocence. Well, that's a mistake for a start. This tribute by A.M. Is not the earliest versified criticism in English. I can think of something earlier even in the 17th century. Thomas Carew's or Carey's Elegy on the Death of Dr. John Donne contains striking criticism in verse, and that is dated some decades earlier than the allegedly Marvell tribute being published in 1633. I have myself pondered for many years in my distress at finding the name Andrew Marvell associated with verse of something less than the highest quality. And it had occurred to me, and I've pondered this, that in fact the AM may stand for Artibus Magister, this, as it were, the generic MA. Or I've even thought that it was often the case in those days, AM is reversed MA, which some would say, of course, is a generic Magister in Artibus. But I have a candidate in a little-known poet called Mercy Aldridge. Mercy Aldridge was a kitchen maid of Anne Bradstreet. And Anne Bradstreet taught her to read and write. But oddly, in a late rhyming letter to the governor of Massachusetts, described Mercy Aldridge as prating too prettily for practice in true piety. You must understand that I had my dates incorrect, as I always do for this reading, and had somehow miscalculated that the reading would be on April the 1st. Let us return to more serious matters. I am now going to read a few pieces by Milton himself, which are particularly dear to me. And they are the satirical sonnets, of which there are 3 or 4, and all of which have inspired some of my later work. The first goes like this. A book was writ of late called Tetrachordon, and woven close both matter, form, and style. The subject new, it walked the town a while, numbering good intellects, now seldom pored on. Cries the stall reader, bless us, what a word on a title page is this! and some in file stand spelling false, while one might walk to Mile End Green. Why is it harder, sirs, than Gordon, Colkitto, or Macdonnell, or Galasp? Those rugged names to our like mouths grow sleek, that would have made Quintilian stare and gasp. Thy age like ours, O soul of Sir John Cheek, hated not learning worse than toad or asp, when thou taught'st Cambridge and King Edward Greek. And the second sonnet is called On the Same. I did but prompt the age to quit their clogs by the known rules of ancient liberty, when straight a barbarous noise environs me of owls and cuckoos, asses, apes, and dogs, as when those hinds that were transformed to frogs railed at Latona's twin-born progeny, which after held the sun and moon in fee. But this is got by casting pearl to hogs, that bawl for freedom in their senseless mood, and still revolt when truth would set them free. License they mean when they cry liberty, for who loves that must first be wise and good. But from that mark how far they rove we see, for all this waste of wealth and loss of blood. License they mean when they cry liberty. That was one of the great forensic points made not only by the libertarians in the 17th century, those who were anxious that their true struggle in behalf of liberty should not be taken by many as a carte blanche for license. And it was also a cry of the conservative opponents of the libertarians, who said that, of course, when the libertarians cried out for liberty, what they really wanted was license. Let me read one more of those satirical sonnets. On the new forces of conscience under the Long Parliament. This is what they call caudate sonnet, an ordinary sonnet of 14 lines followed by 2 codas. Imitated from an Italian satirical form and imitated in turn by that great admirer of Milton in the 19th century, Gerard Hopkins. On the new forces of conscience under the Long Parliament. Because you have thrown off your prelate lord, and with stiff vows renounced his liturgy, to seize the widowed whore plurality from them whose sin ye envied, not abhorred. Dare ye for this adjure the civil sword to force our consciences that Christ set free, and ride us with a classic hierarchy, taught ye by Mere, A.S. and Rutherford, men whose life, learning, faith, and pure intent would have been held in high esteem with Paul's, must now be named and printed heretics by shallow Edwards and Scotch what you call. But we do hope to find out all your tricks, your plots and packing worse than those of Trent, that so the Parliament may with their wholesome and preventive shears clip your phylacteries, though baulk your ears, and succour our just fears, when they shall read this clearly in your charge: new presbyter is but old priest writ large. Magnificent semantic pun in that last line. And this is, as I have earlier suggested, it is these poems by Milton that have most inspired my work, at least in the past 12 or 14 years. So now we pass onwards with, as you may well think, comparing small to great, though it's always been my argument that Milton was not particularly small. And I find that the first poem, which I think is quite markedly influenced by Milton, is a poem that appeared in my book Canaan of 1996 and is called To the High Court of Parliament. To the High Court of Parliament, November 1994. Now, people who write, talk, discuss, or criticize this particular poem always make out a case for the fact that November 1994 was a month in which the Thatcher government sold off to developers a piece of public land in London for the price of, I think, £1. And everyone assumes that this is what is meant by November 1994. In fact, only one person who has written about this poem spotted the real reason for the subtitle, and I think that was because I told her. November 1994 happened to be the 350th anniversary of the publication of Areopagitica, which came out in November 1644. And of course, Areopagitica begins as an address to the High Court of Parliament, not by a member of that Parliament, Milton was not, but as somebody writing in his private capacity to try to influence the public weal. To the High Court of Parliament, November 1994. Who could outbalance poised Marvell, balk the strength of Gilray's unrelenting, unreconciling mind? Grandees risen from scavenge, to whom Milton addressed his ideal censure. Once more singular, ill-attended, staid and bitter Commedia, as she is called, delivers to your mirth her veiled presence. Nonetheless, amazing, Barry's and Pugin's grand dark lantern above the incumbent Thames. You, as by custom, unillumined masters of servile counsel, who can now speak for despoiled merit, the fouled catchments of Demos, as thy high lamp presides with sovereign equity over against us, across this densely reflective, long-drawn procession of waters. I feel in one sense that I am here by a kind of cumulative chapter of errors. As I heard Andrew McNeely mention in his very kind introduction, Milton's name appears fairly sparsely in my collected critical writings. I took a nervous glance at it before setting out to come to Oxford today, and I found that in a book of some 800 pages, Milton features in about 16 footnotes. And the interest I take in him, in those essays, is largely semantic. I do engage in various essays on the fact that, and it's a delightful thought, that according to the OED, Milton created the word sensuous. He invented the word sensuous, and the OED will tell you this. In order to distinguish accurately as never before the, as it were, the acceptable use of sense experience from the unacceptable use of sense experience, which is, of course, sensual. The implication is that until Milton invented the word sensuous, sensual had to cover both the positive and the negative meanings. I also take considerable interest in the fact, when I'm writing on the 17th century, that the word heat appears to be a good word in Milton, to slink out of that race where the immortal garland is to be run for, not without dust and heat, and is a bad word for his royalist opponents. Clarendon is always speaking about how he deplores the heat, the ill temper into which political discussion has betrayed our country. So it is, as I say, it is a fairly limited semantic concern that I have with him. I wish I hadn't taken up so much time in my notes with my silly joke about Mercy Aldridge, because I am, in fact, having some difficulty in finding the more serious parts of my reading and discussion. Bear with me, please. Yes. I would now like to read from a book called The Triumph of Love, which dates, I think, from 1998, maybe. Two short sections from that. And you can see how I use it in this section. Milton, the political pamphlets, Blake in old age, reaffirming the hierarchies, Peggy Passim, virtually Bernanos, if only for having written La colère des imbéciles remplit le monde, Radnoti at Bore, the great self-recovery of that. Ta-ra, ta-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra. When I gave a reading of that at Emmanuel College some 8 or 10 years ago, I incorporated in the last line a little dance. Where is my hat? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Milton, the political pamphlets, Blake in old age, reaffirming the hierarchies, Peggy Passim, virtually Bernanos, if only for having written La colère des imbéciles remplit le monde, Radnoti at Bore, the great self-recovery of that. Ta-ra, ta-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra. This met with such horrid acclaim that until this afternoon, I have not dared to repeat the routine. But I thought that having started off with Mercy Aldridge, things could only get better. I have to say that it is clear that I am not a Miltonist in the strict technical, historical, bibliographical way that brilliant Miltonists now exist. The reason that I began by reading Andrew Marvell's tribute to him is that I wanted to place myself in that particular line of development. I think I am a celebrator. I am a celebrator of Milton as a figurehead in many ways, a figurehead for libertarian thought. It's a line that, of course, goes from Andrew Marvell's, I think, very fine tribute. I disagree with my Milton dictionary on that. I think it's a magnificent tribute. And comes through, of course, to Wordsworth's Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. England hath need of thee, she is a fen of stagnant waters, and so on. That is to say, Milton as the arch poet of our broad freedoms, not the mortalist Milton, and certainly not the Ramist logician Milton. When I discovered that Milton was a Ramist logician, I nearly fainted. I thought, well, a mortalist I can live with. But in a manner of speaking, you understand. A mortalist I can live with, but a Ramist logician is really going a bit too far. I hold court with Richard Hooker on the Ramists, and Hooker, as you probably know, is extremely and derisively dismissive of Ramist logic in the book on ecclesiastical polity. So let us move on to some of my other poems to Milton or concerning Milton. Before I do that, let me read another piece of Milton. It's from the magnificent closing of the 5th book of Paradise Lost. The great passages from that great work. It's the lines describing the defiance to Satan of the seraph Abdiel. So spake the seraph Abdiel, faithful found. Among the faithless, faithful only he. Among innumerable false, unmoved, unshaken, unseduced, unterrified, his loyalty he kept, his love, his zeal. Nor number nor example with him wrought, though single. From amidst them forth he passed, long way through hostile scorn, which he sustained superior, nor of violence feared aught, and with retorted scorn his back he turned on those proud towers to swift destruction doomed. Magnificent. Magnificent. I published a book after that called Scenes from Comus. The actual inspiration for this book was a glorious piece of music by my friend, the composer Hugh Wood, to whom I dedicated this book for his 70th birthday. He had written a piece, as I say, called Scenes from Comus. It is recorded, and I would recommend anyone to listen to it. This is rather more, as you would expect, the earlier Milton is the inspiration of this. Section 9. These are very short sections. Section 9. Suppose ingenious we tell our loves, Hymenes in the script, melts like a pearl, chemical self-renewal not to be paid for, retroactively inheres, working forgiveness within the act, enriches all performance in the great masking or present chamber of reason and desire. You with your demon or genius, I with one who for the fiction's sake must feel betrayed. Ten. Suppose I tell it otherwise. Hymene is of the blood, therefore the lovely name. The elect possess it, subject to possession. It cannot be bought, bartered, part exchanged. The sun is drawn away, darkness advances, bleeding our scene, mysterious dry ice, tinctured with earth smoke, Orphic harbinger. All that comes out of course, the use of this mysterious and rather dour plant, hymene, which is one of the preservative and sacral things in Milton's Ludlow Masque. And I go on about hymene. Its prickliness is infamous, famous, so many contesting, dim prodigy, uncultivated and of glummest fruition. Proffer it then to that transparent virgin of pregnant chastity. Let her go, far afflicted with her friends. Before I read another piece of early Milton, because I think that clearly this was in my mind when I came to write the next section. It's a very lovely early bit of English from that mixed Latin and English vacation exercise for Christ's College, Cambridge, Anno Aetatis 19. And it's about rivers. Rivers arise, whether thou be the son of utmost Tweed or Ouse or Gulfy Dun or Trent, who like some earth-born giant spreads his 30 arms along the indented meads, or sullen mole that runneth underneath, or Severn swift, guilty of maiden's death, or rocky Avon, or of sedgy Lee, or coaly Tyne, or ancient hallowed Dee, or Humber loud that keeps the Scythian's name, or Medway smooth, or royal towered Tame. I love coaly Tyne. It is so unexpected and yet so right when one encounters it in those verses. And this, I think, is the sort of thing I made out of that. Hemone may mean techne, now he tells me. Hemone means whatever Milton meant by it. Wisdom of the blood was not intended. He was his own man like Lawrence, not proto-anything that I can think of. Nor was Lawrence's blood wisdom in isolation. Look at our tangled history, Neptune's forest submerging, compounding its coal measures, smoke-enriched England, her children ashen. And two slightly, how are we doing? Yes, it's all right, not much longer. Slightly longer sections from Scenes from Comus. So let there be nothing where it stood, Ludlow's brief mirage, Comus's spectral body as its material, which might absently have been conjured. This in worn September through Michaelmas. You'd expect no late miraculous quicksilver in those quick-falling days. Here's Michaelmas once more, the sainted angels bearing themselves aloof, preemptive. At Coventry, Epstein's fiercely applauded Michael sentinels his gaze. The spire positioned in a vacant lot soars and is held alight with the dull rain. That, of course, is the surviving tower and spire of the great medieval church, which was destroyed. Which in fact, the tower and the spire survived the ruin of the church. That is the point of this poem, or section. And one more, slightly longer. It begins with a line from an unfinished fragment by Milton. First line is Milton. In wintry solstice, like the shortened light, sky closes and sea parts, ranging itself from unpredicted sources, radiant when you guess blankness under broad shadow. Hidden artificers of the visible withhold what's long been destined to the dark. In shifting scapes, eternity resumes. I cannot fault its nature, act by act, gauged by the lost occasions of the sun. Ephemera's durance, vast particulars, and still momentum, measures of the void.
What did you say?
We now move to the last poems that I shall read of my own. I have one more fragment of Milton to read. This is indeed from a treatise of civil power, the Miltonic title. And it is, I warn you, or I advise you, I don't warn you, I advise you that it's somewhat longer than the poems I've read hitherto. It's called On Reading Milton and the English Revolution. That, of course, is a book by my namesake, Christopher Hill, the left-wing historian. I have a nightmare that sometime in the future my works will be attributed to him and his works will be attributed to me. But I have other nightmares of that kind. I half expect that on my deathbed I shall sit up suddenly and cry out, Philip Larkin was the true Messiah. On reading Milton and the English Revolution. The craft of vision is what I make of this. They did so labour salvation. The dispossessed their triumphal example. England can do without most of us. For us also language is a part broken league. Fix your own tale to the Jerusalem donkey. Radiant Urim, also the discreet seraphic Viscera. I say again, it can seem too much. The seeds of virtue implanted by some mystical generation. He that has obtained to know this goes without answer. Wiped the old slur between liberty and license. Wisdom is back. How did it go, wisdom? The soul knows there no difference of sex. Sympathy flows, utterance is end stopped, as if that stopped collusion. Perhaps it does. Memory too returns, her key still in the lock. God himself is our Zion, where all creatures are fellow citizens, the ox with the butterfly, the butchers in meaty aprons, Aaron's jewels, a Commonwealth shilling from an oddments box. Great contrariety of mind, old reprobates stuck with new risen saints, now cry, Amen. The mind closes, or the imagination turns itself down. If for no other cause than play catharsis. That being said, the choice better than R. Harris with laryngitis, a simulacrum of living speech strikes the aggrieved ear. debridement, that means reaming out the mock virginity of the wound. Idiolect, that could be idiot dialect, but isn't. Wrenching and spraining the text for clown comedy amid the pain. The inward and irremediable disposition of a man. This I can live with. The remnant is redeemed. Forge the true key. We shall insert as ordered, not wrenching and spraining since I have strained myself. How certainly words are at one with all corruptible things. Bow down at the great stone altar sacred to billiards. Getting into the act, I ordain a dishonoured and discredited nation. Milton or Clarendon might well approve. Can't say who else would. It smacks rather of moral presumption. Things are not that bad. H. Mirren's super. Everything is holy, and we will reign in our young bodies and make good our age. O earth, 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 Fairfield and Ribbenhall shall resurrect like Cookham. Bagshot Heath grow vines for us. How else should I prophesy? Misguided, misconceiving, misinspired. Joy is free-willing, but more free-loading. In the book of Enoch, how the angels cover all, is it all? All the daughters of men. I brood on this and am repelled by it less than by my own gaffes of citation. They have cut down our choice cedars, curse for blessing. If God were not light, how does it go on? Or at whose say-so? Trouble the hypothesis to be an immortal fact. It is enough even mortalists concede the nub. Save God's being light, spirit could not have been. The marvelous webs are rhymed with eternity. But to go out with all that ragged history turmoiling in your wake, a load of screw wrath, regret cannot now get closer to target. Sibylline interdict spells blunder. Resign! Though resignation itself proclaims the finder. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.